Tanya Weber was a 17-year-old girl studying at Logan High School. She lived with her parents and 4 younger siblings at 454 West Center Street in Logan, Utah. On June 25, 1965, Tanya Weber's parents and her sisters had traveled to a family reunion in Weiser, Idaho, leaving their oldest daughter home to attend the wedding of a friend. Tanya had joyfully attended and assisted at the wedding. She also caught the bride's bouquet at the reception. After the happy event, Tanya, along with 3 other girls, went out to eat before heading home. Tanya was dropped off at her home, located at 454 West Center Street, at around 12:15 in the morning. When she reached her front porch, she realized she had forgotten her house key in the car, and as her parents and her siblings were away at the family reunion, she had no way to get in. As such, she left her bouquet on the porch and ran after the car that had dropped her off, hoping to catch up with them. A boy who lived in the neighborhood, who was watching late-night TV, reported seeing Tanya out of his window. This would be the last time she was seen alive. The next morning, a neighbor found her body just blocks away from her home. Tanya had been shoved behind the bushes at the rear of a home located at 324 West Center Street. She was found partially clothed and with one of her own stockings tied around her neck. A pathologist later stated that she died between midnight and 2 a.m. The pathologist's report noted that while the stockings were around her neck, they were not used to strangle her. Marks on her body indicated that she had been choked to death by hand. The medical examiner stated that the stockings appeared to be, quote, an afterthought on the part of the killer. From the bruises, scratches, and mud stains, it appeared that her body had been dragged for some distance before being abandoned. A shoe, stocking, and ripped blue shirt were found near the body. The medical examiner stated that they found no evidence of sexual assault. Police questioned Tanya's friends, family, and all the guests who attended the wedding reception. However, nothing came of those interviews. They also questioned neighbors, but besides the young boy who had watched Tanya run, no one had seen her. He stated that she did not look like she was running in a frantic fashion as though she was being chased. Over the years, there would be several suspects, but they would eventually be released for lack of evidence. Among those suspects, there was one in particular to whom police paid close attention. The man, 27-year-old Owen Kimball, lived just a few blocks away from Tanya and knew her personally. The statements police collected suggested that Kimball had been at the scene around the time of Tanya's death. When police went to question him, his wife said that he had been missing since June 28th. His wife reported to police that Kimball had told her he was going up to Logan Canyon in order to collect bait for an upcoming fishing trip with his 2 young sons, but that he never returned. After intense searching, a civilian pilot flying over Mount Logan located Kimball's pickup truck, hidden in heavy brush at the head of Spring Hollow. When members of the Cass Sheriff's Jeep Patrol reached the truck, they found Kimball dead inside, with material stuffed in the vehicle's tailpipe, apparently used for the purposes of asphyxiation. Kimball's death was ruled a suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. The following day, a newspaper article identified Kimball as the primary suspect in Tanya's murder, citing police reports that several pieces of physical evidence, later revealed to be a shoe print and clothing fibers, connected him to the scene. Despite this, Kimball's wife vehemently maintained his innocence, and his in-laws, a prominent family from Logan, also supported him unwaveringly in the days that followed. After Kimball's death, the Cache County attorney said that there were, quote, no prime suspects to prosecute, therefore leaving the case of Tanya's murder unresolved. The case remained cold for the next 50 years. Then, in 2022, Logan City Police reopened the case. Tanya's clothing was sent to the Utah State Crime Lab for DNA analysis, which revealed the presence of DNA from several different men. Subsequently, investigators chose to obtain a DNA sample from Kimball's remains. a court order was issued to exhume Kimball's body. On November 2, 2023, his remains were sent to the Utah Medical Examiner's Office for DNA collection. Kimball's DNA was found to be an exact match to the DNA found on Tanya's clothing. Upon review of the numerous statements and evidence collected from the 1965 investigation, as well as the recently obtained DNA sample, authorities were comfortable stating that Mr. Kimball did in fact kill Tanya. In a press release, authorities stated that, quote, "This evidence would be sufficient to obtain a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt." The case was finally solved after 59 years. All 4 of Tanya's younger siblings are still living: her sisters Julie Wiley and Rhonda Christensen, and her brothers Stephen and David Weber. In regards to the closing of the case, Rhonda Christensen said, quote, "There are no words to express how it feels after 59 years. She goes on to say that they are truly grateful to the law enforcement and civilian volunteers who cared about solving the case, and for the resources and time spent on pursuing answers. Anne Woodward was a 46-year-old woman living with her husband, Leslie H. Woodward. The two had married in 1953 and together started Woody's Tavern in 1963. Woody's was one of many bars in the bustling city of Moab, Utah. By 1973, Anne had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, and was operating the bar in town. On March 2, 1973, Anne failed to return home after closing the bar by herself in the early morning hours. When she never came back, her husband Leslie decided to check the bar. At 6:45 a.m., he opened the bar door to find a horrifying sight. He saw Anne's partially nude body lying on the floor between 2 pool tables. Anne's husband immediately called police. Upon arrival, police noted that the cash register had been rifled through and an undetermined amount of money had been stolen. Crime scene investigators found a pack of playing cards on one of the tables and Camel cigarette butts in an ashtray. These were collected and preserved as evidence. An autopsy revealed that the mother of 4 had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death by her own trousers. The police believed that the perpetrator had been a patron of the bar who had stayed in the tavern, quote, after closing time. Unfortunately for investigators, there was not a lot of evidence present at the crime scene. Authorities questioned the patrons who visited the bar that day, and 25 men became persons of interest, but due to lack of concrete evidence, no one was charged with Anne's murder, and the case would soon go cold. Anne's murder has haunted the small and close-knit desert town of Moab for over half a century. While police were not able to find her killer, they believed that Ted Bundy was the likely culprit, as he also had raped and killed multiple women in the area around the time of Anne's death. Authorities noted that while Bundy admitted to 30 murders, his real victim count is yet unknown. Police had never been able to prove that Bundy was the culprit, however, due to a lack of evidence. So they inertly and irresponsibly assumed that Anne was just another one of his unnamed victims, and so the case file would merely collect dust in the coming decades. In 2006, Moab police reopened Anne's file in the hopes that new DNA technology could help solve the cold case, but little came of it. That same year, the former Moab police chief, Melvin Dalton, was quoted as admitting that, quote, "a lot of evidence from the slaying may have been lost." Dalton also pointed out that the crime scene back in 1973 may not have been properly processed, commenting, quote, "People were going in and out like they were going to church," he said. "There wasn't a sign up, no tape up, nothing that said police line, do not cross." During the investigation, Dalton had given several individuals polygraph tests and had some suspects, but both individuals got attorneys and therefore they did not provide any further information. In light of the lack of new evidence, Dalton decided to keep the DNA from both the victim and all potential suspects, in hopes that one day the right technology could be used to identify the killer. Meanwhile, the case would eventually go cold again until 2023, when a new detective working on the case, Jeremy Dexler, decided to uncover the 2 boxes of evidence collected from the initial investigation and send it to the crime lab. The DNA evidence had sat at the Moab Police Department's storage unit for over 50 years and was not easy to locate as it had been moved to another building. But eventually, the DNA results came back at the end of May 2024, and the results confirmed that one Doug Chudomelka was the killer. A substantial amount of Chudomelka's DNA was on the inside of Anne's pants and on all the buttons of her shirt. Chudomelka had a history of violent behavior and was one of 25 suspects in the case. While nearly anyone who had frequented Woody's bar was considered a suspect, Chudomelka stood out due to several incriminating factors. His mid-1960s Ford sedan resembled the car witnesses claimed was parked next to Anne's the night of March 1st. Autopsy results state that Anne was murdered sometime between 1:40 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. in the early morning hours of March 2nd. At the time, Chudomelka told investigators that he had spent the night drinking at the Westerner Grill, not at Woody's. However, the bartender at the Westerner denied ever seeing him there on the night of March 1st. Chudomelka's girlfriend, Joyce, initially provided an alibi, stating that he had arrived home around 2 a.m. on March 2nd, but she later corrected this to 4:10 a.m. On July 3, 1973, Chudomelka had been arrested for domestic violence. During this period, Joyce alleged that he was Anne's killer and expressed her willingness to speak with the county attorney. However, she later retracted her statement and only confirmed that Chudomelka had come home at 4 a.m., not at 2 a.m. Chudomelka and the other suspects were asked to take polygraph tests, but Chudomelka was too intoxicated at the time for the test to be administered. Eventually, he ceased cooperating with police and requested legal representation. Later, Chudomelka was convicted of cattle rustling in San Juan County and served a probationary period before leaving the area for good. Although Chudomelka did not know the victim personally, Detective Drexler speculates that he might have played poker with Anne at the pub and could have been angered by the fact that he lost. Drexler also suggested that the crime could have been a crime of opportunity rather than a premeditated act of rage, given Chudomelka's drunken, violent history. Chudomelka passed away in 2002 at the age of 67 without ever facing justice for the crime. However, county lawyer Stephen Stocks is convinced that had he lived, he would have been found guilty of murder. The case could finally be considered closed after more than 4 decades. Dorothy Marie Sell was born on June 1, 1949, in Mandan, North Dakota. She graduated from Mandan High School in 1967. In 1980, she'd been living in the Seattle area and working 2 jobs. By day, she was an instructor at the Boeing Aircraft Company, and most nights she worked at the Gianto Pizza restaurant for extra money, as her divorce had left her with little resources. She had previously been married to Michael Sell, but they were now legally divorced and she lived alone. On February 23, 1980, Dorothy was last seen leaving her shift at Gianto's Pizza somewhere between 10 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. The pizzeria was only 3 blocks from her condominium on 106th Avenue Southeast. 48 hours later, when Dorothy had failed to show up for work at Boeing for 2 consecutive days, her family and friends became concerned and requested a police welfare check. A Kent police officer, accompanied by a family friend, went to her condo to investigate. They found the front door locked and 3 newspapers on the porch. However, they noticed that the sliding glass door at the back of the condo was slightly ajar, about 16 to 18 inches open, with the drapes drawn. Crime scene technicians later discovered that the screws securing the locking anchor to the door frame were loose, which had facilitated the break-in. Upon fully entering the condo, they found Dorothy's nude body upstairs in a room that seemed to be used for sewing. A brown robe was wrapped around her lower left arm and hand, and there were marks on her neck consistent with bruising. An autopsy later revealed that Dorothy had died from asphyxia due to cervical compression. She had also sustained blunt force trauma to her head. The examination indicated that she had been violently beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted before being left partially naked for dead. At the time of the murder, investigators collected sperm samples from her body and her robe, but DNA technology was still in its infancy in 1980, and nothing substantial was able to be ascertained from the samples. In February of 1996, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab examined the DNA evidence from the bathrobe, but their results were inconclusive. By 2002, the DNA was entered into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, but no matches were found. Advances in technology in 2016 allowed the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab to finally obtain a partial DNA profile from Dorothy's bathrobe. In March of 2022, senior forensic genealogist Misty Gillis, working for Identifiers International, used her advanced forensic genealogy techniques to compare the DNA profile to others. Her efforts identified 11 potential suspects. Among these suspects were brothers Kurt and Kenneth Kundert, who were both incarcerated for unrelated assaults. Authorities coordinated with the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office in Arkansas in order to request voluntary DNA samples from the brothers. Kurt provided a sample, which was not a match, leading to his exclusion as a suspect. Kenneth, however, did not cooperate. Believing Kenneth to be the suspect, Camp Police surveilled him in Arkansas. While smoking in a Walmart parking lot, Kenneth discarded a cigarette butt, which detectives retrieved and tested. The DNA on the base of the cigarette matched the DNA recovered from the crime scene. Further investigation revealed that Kenneth had worked in the Snohomish County area in 1987, and he lived in an apartment complex that was only about 1,200 feet from where Dorothy was murdered. During an interview, Kenneth appeared nervous, smoking a pack of cigarettes and carefully discarding the butts and a crushed water bottle into his own pocket. On August 20th, 2024, Kenneth Kundert was finally arrested and charged for Dorothy Sill's murder. His bail had been set at $3 million cash or bond. Although his arraignment was originally scheduled for August 29th, 2024, it was later postponed as he is currently fighting his extradition from Arkansas.